Welcome to plankandplane.com. In this video, I'll be making a bridge for the tenor guitar from a rough sawn rosewood blank. To start, I jointed the face and one edge of the blank on the jointer and then took it to the bandsaw to resaw it close to the final thickness. The bandsaw blade leaves a rough surface, so next I'll take the bridge blank over to the thickness sander and put it through the thickness sander, and this will smooth the surface out, and also I'll bring the thickness of the bridge blank down very close to the final thickness. The final thickness of the bridge blank needs to be 5/16 of an inch, so I will use my gauge blocks to periodically check that thickness as I put it through the thickness sander, and I'll stop when I'm just barely above the 5/16 of an inch. I want to leave just a little bit of thickness there for final sanding. You can see here that I'm just barely above that 5/16 of an inch thickness, so that's good enough for now. Next I took the bridge blank and ripped it down to near the final width, which is 1 inch and 5/16. And I didn't catch that on the video here, but you can see here there's the bridge blank and the piece that I ripped off of it. Next I'll cut the bridge blank to length. In order to prevent tear out, I put a piece of blue tape around each end of the blank where the cuts will be. I took it to the cross-cut sled, squared off one end, and then turned it around and cut it to the final length. The curved tapered profile of the bridge is 1 1/4 inches long from each end, so I'll go ahead and mark that on the bridge blank now, just so I have the reference, and I'll use the gauge blocks to do that. Next I'm going to make a template of the bridge shape. I traced the bridge shape on a piece of tracing paper from the blueprint. I stuck that tracing paper to a piece of double-faced tape, cut it to shape, and then stuck the double-faced tape to a piece of 1/8 inch plywood. I'll cut the shape close to the line on the bandsaw, and then I'll sand it down to the line on the drum sander mounted in the drill press. I'll stick this template to my bridge blank using a piece of double-faced tape and use that as a guide to cut the shape of the bridge. In hindsight, I think I could have just used the template to trace the shape of the bridge onto the bridge blank and use that to cut cutting it down close to the line on the bandsaw, and then bringing it down to the line with the drum sander as I did with the template. But a pencil line is kind of hard to see on the rosewood when you're cutting and shaping, so having the template stuck directly to the bridge blank made it easier for me to see where I was at and where I needed to cut and sand down to. The next step is to lay out and drill the bridge pinholes. And as I said, the pencil is hard to see on the rosewood, so I'm putting a piece of blue tape on the bridge to lay the bridge pinhole locations out on. And also this will keep from having any tear out when I drill the holes. I determined the location of the bridge pinholes by measuring them out on the blueprint and transferring those measurements over to the bridge blank. Before I cut the bridge pin holes, I wanted to figure out how I was going to cut the slot for the bridge saddle, and I came up with this jig. So what you see here is me testing out the jig, and I'm not using my bridge blank, but I have a piece of walnut that I've cut out to the same dimensions of the bridge, and I'm using that as a test piece. The bit I'll be using to cut the saddle slot is a 1/8 inch down cut spiral bit, and I got that from MLCS Woodworking. So I'll load this up in the router. This jig looks a little complicated, but it's basically just a fence mounted at an angle, two stop blocks to stop the router at each end, and then some hold downs to hold the bridge blank down. Really the hardest part of making this jig was getting that angle correct for the router to ride against. It's just a very slight angle, and I just took measurements directly off the blueprint and transferred that over to my jig and made the angle that way, and I had to go through a few blanks and a few adjustments of that back fence in order to get it right. And right now I'm just setting the depth of my plunge router. The slot is 1/8 of an inch deep. So this was a successful test. It actually took me 3 blanks I went through before I finally got the angle right. So I went ahead and did it on the bridge blank. I don't have the video of that, but essentially it was done the same way as you see here with the test piece. You can see the bridge blank here with the saddle slot cut in it, and I'm drilling out the bridge pin holes. I made a fence and put on my drill press for the blank to ride against, so the holes are positioned correctly. Now I'm ready to shape that curved tapered profile on each end of the bridge, and I'll take the measurements for the end of the bridge directly off the blueprint, and it is about 1/8 of an inch on the end. I'm going to stick the bridge blank to a piece of plywood to do the shaping of the profile, and you'll see why I did that in just a minute. So there's that stuck to there. I have my thicknessing fixture set up on my drill press, which is just a drum sander with a fence behind it, which I can adjust the distance between the drum and the fence, and I'll use that to shape this taper. The curvature of the taper will be determined by the diameter of the drum. And that final thickness out on the end of the bridge will be determined by the distance between the drum and the fence. You can see here why I stuck the bridge blank to the piece of plywood, because I have to pass the bridge blank into the drum sander and then turn it around and pass the other end through. And if I didn't have it stuck to that piece of plywood, it would work when I have the straight edge of the bridge against the bottom of the thickness jig, but when I turn it around, the curved edge of the bridge would be against it, and it would wobble around, and I wouldn't get a straight line on the taper. So I'm just using that piece of plywood as a fence or a guide to feed the bridge blank in there, so it's parallel regardless of which edge that I'm putting through at the time. To shape the profile, I just started with the distance between the drum and the fence slightly less than what the thickness of the blank was, and just worked my way down to the final thickness of 1/8 inch. There's the final bridge. Once again, not the exact contour, but close. Said these are more cosmetic. You want the ends to be fairly close to the thickness here. All in all, very happy with this. This by far is the most complex milled piece that has gone into the guitar so far. The next thing I can do is cut the saddle at least to length and fit it into the slot, so you can see it fits pretty good in there. So it'll not only have to be cut to length, it also needs to be rounded off on the ends. I'll do that next. Okay, I'm zoomed in here on the saddle slot in the bridge, and I need to cut this to length. And I don't want to just butt this against that end and mark it, because this is rounded off right here. So you can see there's a space right there, so I need to account for that. The end of this needed to be rounded over. So I'll lay this next to that slot, and I'm actually going to cut this slightly long, and then I'll sand it to the final length. This will work good. So I just got a scrap piece of wood. Get a clamp. Lightly clamp that into place. Get it exactly where I want it to cut. For extra measure to make sure it doesn't slide around. I'll put this up. Okay, so that saddle is clamped securely into the little miter box. There's a piece of saddle that I just cut off. And as you can see, it's slightly longer. I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's just slightly longer than the slot. So I have a piece of sandpaper. I'm going to start rounding over the one end. It's fitting pretty good there. This is 220 grit sandpaper. I don't know if I said that. Okay, so that fits. This is a profile of the bridge. So this edge closest to the saddle needs to be slightly rounded over, and then this back edge here needs to be rounded over even more. So this round over represents this area right here, and then this slight round over represents this area back here. I'll do that next. So I won't do a video of this whole thing, but I'm just going to start sanding. And in my estimation, there's no critical dimension here. It's just however I want it by eye. So I'll just sand it to a point that looks pleasing to me and call it good. Sanded it out to 400 grit. Rounded this edge over slightly and just knocked the edge off that side. I sanded the bridge down to 400 grit. Next I'll buff the bridge out, and I'm using an old shoe polisher that I have to buff the bridge, and I'll stick the bridge to a piece of plywood again just to handle it as I have it in the buffer. I'm going to stick this at the far end. So that worked amazingly well. I'm surprised. If you can see you can see the shine on that. It feels just silky smooth. I'm happy with that. So be sure to watch for the next video. In it I will be putting the finish on the guitar. Thanks for watching.